Welcome to GenderMeowster Podcast Network. Genderful is a talk show featuring non-binary and trans folks discussing various topics and special interests. We kindly remind our listeners that no person is a monolith of identities. All opinions are the speaker's own. This show airs live on Twitch at twitch.tv/GenderMeowster, and VODs with show notes can also be found on YouTube. Hello, everyone. Basically, I was just greeting everyone by name. Welcome in, darkness. Welcome in, everyone. Let me get a couple shout-outs going here. So my very cool clip player thing isn't working right now. But we're going to get some shout-outs going anyways. These folks are rad, trans and non-binary pals who are also streamers. You can go check out all of their wonderful content. Of course, we got to get our guest for the day, Brooklyn, in. We'll make sure to get a couple of those shout-outs throughout the day. So we're gonna, as usual, we're going to start stream off today with my gender check-in, my HRT journey check-in. My name is GenderMeowster. I use they, them pronouns, and I made a list of things. There's only 3 on the list so that I can be concise. So I've forgotten how many weeks we are in. I think it's 6.5 maybe, but check the title of this VOD later and that'll be the true answer. I forget. We're not 2 months, but more than 1 month, somewhere in there. And a couple things I'm noticing is my skin is really drying out. So like at first it was like, oh my glob, HRT getting all the acne. And then I think a combination of taking testosterone and putting the minoxidil on my face, which is something I'm doing to stimulate beard growth, has like dried everything out. My like scalp is itchy for the first time in my life, like pretty consistently. And I remember looking at Capybara the other day and being like, is this why they market Head and Shoulders to men? Like, are dude heads just itchier than chick heads? That was really, like, gender essentialist of me. But, like, in general, are testosterone beings itchier on their skin than estrogen beings? And she was like, yeah, that's totally a thing, because your skin gets tougher and also drier. And I was like, oh, no. So that's a thing that I get to navigate. Yeah. Okay, so what else? I've been talking and learning a bit about like voice training. Thank you for the sub, by the way. Part of the voice training stuff is you have to be able to change your resonance. Like even if your pitch changes, if the sort of canter of the way your voice happens is still, and we actually talked about this in our bonus gender stream on Friday. If you still have like that really excited customer service voice that goes up at the end, then people are still going to code you as feminine or female when they talk to you, even if you're talking all the way down here. So that's a whole time. Blink, blink. We spent a lot of time on Friday talking about some of the different resources that are available for voice training. If you're interested in any of that, there's the information is recorded forever in our Discord server. The invite is now in the chat and it's on the socials up there. Anywhere you find my link tree, you can find the invite to the Discord. Side note on that, we also added 4. Yes, I worked all weekend. We added 4 opt-in channels so far for questioning things. If you're questioning your gender, your sexuality, if you might be disabled or have multiple types of disabilities, and if you are questioning if you might be neurodiverse, for example, maybe autism or ADHD, as is my case. I imagine we could also talk about different forms of dissociative identity disorder, as the medical people call it, and being basically a plural system. We could also discuss that in there. And there are more requests for more identities and things, so we're going to keep working on that and keep making our space as diverse as possible. Yeah. Okay, the last thing on the trans check-in is one thing that I've really, really been noticing the last, I would say 2 weeks especially, and I don't know if this is Um, Also related to getting my first COVID shot. But one thing I've been noticing is my energy can be like go, 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 and then it just crashes. Like I wake up and I have a lot of energy, which once I got on my CPAP machine, that also helped. But there's this like I don't know, I think it is the testosterone. It gives me that boost and I just go really hard, but then I crash really hard too. And so there's like more peaks and valleys. My energy used to be more of a kind of blah line that just sort of went on forever, and now it's more peak valley e. So, yeah. So those are the three things that I have to share for my check-in this week. Thanks for listening. I'm going to undeafen and switch over to our guests now. We can do introductions. Uh, hey,
Hello.
Brooklyn, how's it going?
Hey, good, good. Sorry, I have your stream still up, and which is apparently on a delay.
It's all good.
So there we
Um,
go.
I love muting tabs. It's such a useful skill when multi-lurking in all the streams.
Yes, yes, it is. Although apparently you can only lurk in 3 streams at a time, which I feel is unfair.
Really?
Because I can pay attention to like at least 3 streams without muting because ADHD. Yeah, so that's something that I've read recently, or that people talk about, is like you can be in as many streams, but it only counts the first 3 that you open, or something like that, or the last 3. Yeah, something like
Fascinating.
that.
I
Um,
hadn't even heard that.
the ways of Twitch are weird and wonderful. No, not wonderful, just weird.
Well, Brooklyn, I'm really glad that you're here with us today.
Yeah.
I, I, at this in this moment, I'm forgetting what chain of other streamers whose chats I met you in, but I'm really glad
I
that we met.
I think mostly Thinks Internet, because I think Thinks Internet ages and ages ago rated into you, and I was like, oh, cool. Fellow trans streamer must follow. Like, that is the law. If you meet a fellow trans streamer, you must follow. And then I had lurked in a couple of your streams, and I think then again started talking to you again more recently, either in Thinks Internet stream or in your own, or both. But I'm pretty sure it's Thinks Internet.
That's,
I could be wrong
yeah,
though.
I think so. I think I don't remember if I rated into Thanks Internet stream or if I was just like, I've been following you for months and haven't caught a stream yet. I need to get on that. And then was like, holy smokes, this community is so wholesome and great.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite communities on the internet. Um, they're really great. They're like a second family to me.
No, I love that so
Y-
much. So good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad that you're here. Um, I want to start with just like introductions. So you probably just heard a bunch of me talking about myself, but um, since I think that part maybe isn't going to be in the podcast, I'll just say again, I'm GenderMeowster and I use they them pronouns. And
I'm
yeah,
Brooke. Yeah.
non-binary pal.
Cool. Yeah. Um, my name is Brooklyn. Uh, I am one of those weirdos who uses my own name as my like username everywhere because it's easy. Um, and I identify as a trans woman. Um, and use she, her, goddess pronouns. I'm an Indigenous American living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Um, my Te Reo Maori, which sometimes I slip in Te Reo sentences, which is the language of the Maori people here in New Zealand, isn't the greatest. So please don't go, I heard Brooklyn pronounce it that way, so that's how it's pronounced. And I do apologize. And if I ever say something in Te Reo that you don't know what it means, just ask me. I try not to do it too often, but sometimes it happens because we are a multilingual country here.
That's so wonderful. There's so many things I could ask you about all the words you just said. Oh my glob. Um, I'll start with a fluffy question first, though. I've heard that Amanda Palmer is in your neck of the woods and has been for the last year. Grimace face. Grimace
I'm
face.
not a fan.
Okay, that's fair.
um, Mostly because of her transphobia around some of her songs.
Really? I
and
didn't
her
know.
criticism. Yeah, she has a song that's not about a trans person, but is written about a like it has lots of trans lyrics, and then she I just find her a generally not person I look up to, which is sad because I used to. I really liked her back in the days of the first band that she was in that I just forgot about,
The
left my
Dresden
head,
Dolls.
the Dresden Dolls. But yeah,
Hmm.
but yes, she is. She is in this area. Um,
That is
I
really good for
don't
me to know. I didn't know that.
I don't judge anyone. You know, we all have our own problematic faves. Everyone's problematic in their own ways, in my opinion. So I don't judge anyone who does appreciate or enjoy Amanda Palmer. She's just not for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the info. I had no idea. I will be investigating that personally. Um, okay. So, let's see. So, when we were first talking, there are two things that I've found particularly notable that I don't think has been an identity or feature of any of the other guests I've had on the show. I think you told me you are 20 years into your transition, which is super
20 years
cool.
this year. Yep.
That's so amazing. And
Yeah.
you are also Indigenous, and there are some Indigenous perspectives on gender that are very different from white perspectives. And
Mm.
so I would love to hear about all of those things. But maybe we'll start with tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah. So yeah, I have been transitioned for 20 years. I transitioned when I was 19. Yeah, that math. Yeah. I was like, wait, is that 20 years? Yes, it is. Technically it'll be 20 years this July. Um and it's been quite a time. It's been really interesting as the community has changed. Um and especially since about 7 years ago, I stepped away from doing more trans activism, as I had done trans activism from pretty much the time I transitioned till about 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever, the 13 years. Haha, I did quick math. Um, so for about 13 years, and I was just quite frankly burnt out,
Yeah.
and kind of at the point like I mean, I will never shut up about being trans, and I will always stand up for things as I see them happening. But being that hardcore core where every morning I woke up and my main being was trans activism,
Mm-hmm.
um, it just felt like it was time for me to just perhaps be Brooklyn for a bit,
Yeah.
and not trans Brooklyn. Um,
Just be a person and have a full life.
yeah. And so there's a lot of terminology that um I'm not always familiar with anymore because it's been 7 years, and it has been a transformational, magical 7 years, in my opinion, in the trans community. And so sometimes people, especially since I used to do a lot of trans education, so I used to educate hospitals, psychiatrists, go into schools and talk about trans people and what it's like to be trans and things like that, and kind of real perspectives around that. So sometimes people will see me as this like trans authority, and they'll come up and they'll be like, "What is this?" And I'm like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I don't do this anymore because
Yeah.
the community's moved on, and I have stayed here yelling at the young trans people to get off my porch. Get off my get off my grass. Hey you there, kids.
I love that so much.
Um but obviously I support everyone, all the cool things that are happening out there. Like, I think the recent one was somebody asking me, "Oh, what's a demi girl?" And I'm like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go find out myself, and just finding out things like that and being like, that's really cool. I like that.
Yeah, I love that. You know, I was on a I was invited to a I don't know if I would call it a board meeting, but some sort of community leadership socialist gathering with a group, an organization who has like leftist socialist values, to do sort of like diversity consulting about
Mm,
their community, their space, their streams that they're doing, etc. And and someone was like, yeah, I'm like the one X identity, insert identity here, on the board or on the panel or whatever, and I'm just a person in the community. I'm not like an advocate for the whole community. And so there's a couple things we talk about, like no one person is a monolith of their entire like identity. Like no one trans person can speak for all trans people. So like in general, it's better to have a panel or a council of people with that identity to make a decision for a whole group.
Mm.
But we also, like, I've been realizing more and more, like, I think that there's this thing that I've been doing, which is I'm actually trying to do some of that activism stuff, and I imagine there will come a time where I will be similar to you and kind of burn out and be like, okay, I'm done. Go take the torch, young trans people. I'm gonna go sit on my porch and drink tea with my wife and like learn how to knit or something. Like there will come a time where that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's also something that happens with a lot of diverse communities where allies maybe just expect anyone with that identity to be completely fluent in everything there is to know and just be an encyclopedia
Mm.
and explain everything to you. And so like I make a point of um I don't know, try to make sure folks know like you can't just expect that of people, and you got to ask it in the right space and time and with consent. And like that's why I have this show, so then
Mm.
we can have the gender talk like at a particular time and place. You can come and we can do this thing at this time, but then the rest of the time I could just be a person who's alive and not
Yep.
have to do the teaching all the time. Anyway, that took
Yeah.
me a really long time to say. I don't know why.
It's okay. Um, yeah, and I mean I still kind of put myself out there as I guess because I've done years of training, and I used to live in San Francisco before I moved to New Zealand, and did lots of trainings there. And sometimes some of the trainings that I did in San Francisco were court mandated
Mm-hmm.
trans sensitive, because San Francisco was the first city to have anti discrimination laws against trans people. So if you worked, for example, if you worked for the city of San Francisco in any form, it was mandatory that that you had trans sensitivity, and if somebody made a complaint, they would hire someone like me and my coworkers to come in and train them. And so the perspective I come from is that there is no question I haven't already been asked.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I have that armor like just built in. I have that thick skin. So if you want to ask the weird questions, come ask me. Don't ask your new friend who just transitioned.
Yeah. Yep.
Like,
Yep.
come talk
Yep.
to me.
Yep.
Like, they don't need it. Come
That's
ask
right.
me, and I will tell you that you're an idiot and that you don't need to know that.
I love that.
um, but yeah, uh, yeah, it's I kind of view myself in that kind of way. I'm unflappable, and it's just kind of hard to offend me because I've heard,
Mm-hmm.
and I think recently in one of my just chattings where I was talking about trans stuff, I had just some rando come in and say something. I was just like, that's not even creative. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even. I'm offended at this point at how lame, how sorry, how uh
Underwhelming.
underwhelming, yes, how
Yeah.
underwhelming that um that insult is. Like, that's what offends me. It offends me that that is what you came up with. Like, get creative. I've been doing this for 20 years. I've heard that. So, yeah.
Oh, we have someone posted in chat. I really appreciate that y'all made me aware it's not my job to educate everyone on being trans. It gets really exhausting, and I'm glad to know
Mm.
that I have the courage and resources to direct people to places to educate themselves. Oh, I love that. Thank you, Trans Griffin. Appreciate that. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's like part of my goal with
Absolutely.
this talk show is like to create the educational resources so then people don't get exhausted saying the same thing over and over. Like, let's make a video and then you can just go watch that.
Mm.
It's so
Yeah,
cool.
um, there are lots of people out there who are happy to be trans advocates or whatnot, and know those people. And when somebody says, "I want to talk," can you explain this? Go, no, but you can send it to them. Um, And I also do this thing too where if somebody needs a basic thing, they're like, "I don't understand this." I'll be like, "Blah, blah, blah," and I give them about 20 minutes of my time, and after 20
Mhm.
minutes, I go, "And from now on, from this moment on, it's $75 an hour. Thank you."
Yep. That's right. Yes, for our
Um,
time and our energy. It's a lot to do the thing. Totally.
yeah. So one of the things I wanted to say to any of the fellow trans people, or whatnot in they're watching this, please forgive me if grandma uses some out of date terminology, because I have been out of the scene for a bit. Like, and some of it I still use because it's kind of like the whole debate on queer. I use the word queer. I fought hard to reclaim that word. And another one is MTF. I know that that's not the cool term for trans women anymore. But I sometimes still pull it out for myself because it is the term that I worked through
Mhm.
identifying with and came to terms with identifying with. So I
Mhm.
don't say these terms because I'm trying to be offensive or and by all means use what terms that feel comfortable for you. But some of them I really dislike being told what terms I can and can't use for myself, especially at this point where I've been in the queer community, or the LGBTQIA plus 2 community for, more than 20 years, for about 25 years, and
Mhm.
lots of words have changed.
Yeah.
I will never say that you have to accept the terms that I use as your own, because we all have our own limits, but I do sometimes use some older terms because I'm
Yeah.
old.
Well, and it takes a lot of energy to keep updating those definitions in your head.
Mm,
In my spiritual community, um, there there is this whole thing that's happening. I didn't expect to talk about this, but I feel like it's really topical. So I'm in like this feminist, pagan, like
mm,
anarchist, like love the planet, like everybody works together to lead the thing. Not one person is like the diva at the top of the pile kind of deal. Tradition.
mm,
It's a lot of words, but it's cool. Um, and there's this like both and where we honor our elders, but we also have explicit statements in our principles of unity that talk about like we honor all genders, all gender histories, like sexualities, etc. And we also talk about being anti-racist in our POU, principles of unity. And so there's this balance that our community is having to navigate where um, on the one hand we've got the elders that we want to honor. In our case, honestly, it's a lot of white lesbians. White lesbians are kind of like cis white lesbians for the most part.
mm,
Those are sort of the ones who were pushing the ecofeminist movement back in the 70s. And so there's a lot of like older white lesbians who were young and hip and fresh in the 70s doing the thing, chaining themselves to trees, like all of that. All of that work that they're doing to preserve the planet. And then on the other hand, there's like all of the young trans non binary folks that are like, can we use can we have non-binary deities in our ritual? Like, does it have to be
mm,
goddess, or can we also have godex? And so there's like
mm.
this how do we have both and how do we coexist like intergenerationally and have both the lineage and the history but also the future at the same time? And it's a very delicate thing to navigate, but I think it's really valuable to figure out.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I come from similar kind of spiritual backgrounds. I'm a big old pagan. Um, and one of the things I love about a lot of those older religions is gender is not so clear there.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like this kind of male female dichotomy is very much a white Christian invention because like a lot of indigenous cultures have either gender neutral deities or deities that change gender or have cultural significance uh with alternative genders. As I said before, I live in a Polynesian country, so
Mm-hmm.
the Maori have various different things. The Samoans have different things. Native Americans have different things. But even if you look at white culture, I mean, Loki is a mom. Like
Mm-hmm.
Loki is a mother to a child. Well, technically to a pony, but still, Loki is a mother. Like the gender, this gender thing, this like strict gender thing is actually fairly new. In majority of society, but is pretty much a white Christianity kind of invention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh God. Oh gods.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. There's so many different I don't even what should we talk about next? There's this whole list of great things to discuss.
Oh,
My
I don't
brain
know.
is overloaded with the goodness that's happening right now.
Yeah, I feel like I keep bouncing around on topics because I feel like we were supposed to be talking about
I
like
think we're both ADHD and that's just how it's going to be and I'm okay with that. If people
yes,
have
I
other
am very
expectations like give me $5,000 to get on meds.
at least like as my dear friend Candace from Things Internet says, and I like to steal, is I have at least 3 ADHD. I'm at least 3. Meaning I'm quite ADHD. I have the option for taking medication. I don't always take it because a lot of the medications for if you start them as an adult, because I was I have an official diagnosis. Not that you need a diagnosis to know that you're ADHD or any other neurodivergent.
Totally.
Um, but I do have a diagnosis, and so because of that, I have medication. But the problem is, there is a point. I'm getting to it eventually. We have to go through the woods
It's
and
fair. It's
possibly
fine.
stop at grandma's house to get there.
It's all good.
Is that it causes really bad stomach issues.
Oh
And
shit.
I was it causes an upset stomach, not really bad stomach issues. It causes really upset stomach, but I already have really bad stomach issues because of being born premature and other life issues.
Me too. Look
Because
how tiny my hands are. I was like a month early.
okay, so back in the 80s when I was born, doctors like to like make these predictions on your baby, like what they were going to be like. And so like I was born 3 months premature. My mom didn't get to hold me for the first month of my existence
Were
because
you in an incubator?
I was in an
Me
incubator.
too.
I could literally fit inside my dad's hand.
Yeah, me
Um,
too.
when I came home, because yet again this was the 80s, I couldn't go into a crib because I would fall through the bars. So my
Wow.
first crib was a laundry basket with a pillow and blankets in it.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. You were
uh,
like in a tiny baby jail.
I was so tiny. Which is funny. The doctor was like, unfortunately, because she's premature, she's probably gonna be quite small and short, lean, and like this was the things that they believed about premature babies. And I'm like, and now I sit here, I'm like, I'm 6 foot.
Nice.
I'm not lean at all.
I'm also not
Very
lean at all.
broad. Yeah. And I'm just like, none of your things. Oh, and the other one was that possibly cognitively impaired. And I'm like, that's also not true. Well, there are days, but um, you know, um, yeah, it was a it was really interesting hearing that when my mom was like, "Yeah, you were supposed to be really small." And I'm like, "I'm not." So yeah. Um yeah, so because of being premature, I have a lot of stomach issues. And being so premature, I have a lot of stomach issues. And I find the ADHD meds are difficult for that. Also, ADHD meds are difficult in general because they're class A drugs, so you can't like in New Zealand, like when you can get a prescription for up to 3 months, you can't for ADHD meds. You have to get a new prescription every month, and it's just like, how am I
What?
supposed to remember? How am I supposed to remember to do that? I have ADHD, so I tried to
Oh
make
my
them last as
goodness.
long as possible and use them for good days, like today.
Dang.
So
Yeah. I mean, I think I've already talked about this on the channel a bit in general, but It's like the ADHD makes it hard to get diagnosed for the ADHD.
Mm, and the other thing that's hard though is also is as adults, what's really hard is masking. Is for many of us, we've masked our ADHD in order to survive, and we've learned coping mechanisms and all this other stuff. So you go in and your doctor's like, do you forget things? And I'm like, no. And he's like, oh. And I'm like, because I write everything down in the book.
Yeah.
Everything gets written in the book, so I don't forget things. And he's like, oh, if you didn't have the book, I'd be like, oh no, I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be like laying in bed going, thank goodness I don't have anything to do right now.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, 5 different people who I've all booked to meet at the same time are going, where's Brooklyn? So
Well,
yeah.
luckily we live in such different time zones. I managed to get you at a time that's less high demand in your bioregion, maybe.
Yeah, it's not so much that I'm high in demand. That makes me sound like I'm high in demand. I just like maybe it's an ADHD thing. Maybe it's a weird thing. I have favorite times. So
Yeah.
like, if you're like, oh, do you want to hang out? I'm like, yes, 1 p.m. Do you want a doctor's appointment? Yes, 1 p.m. I do everything like 1 p.m. is a good time for me. It's early in the afternoon. I can noodle around in the morning, maybe get some work done. If I have to travel, it gives me time to travel. So it's more of that. I'll book things, and I book everything I don't like to do on a Thursday because I don't like Thursdays. I've never liked Thursdays. I'm very anti-Thursday. So it's just Thursdays, like
I love
just
this
right
so
there,
much.
sandwiched right between Wednesday, which is hump day, and Friday, which is the end of the week, and you just got Thursday in the middle, dragging things on. So I've always said I don't like Thursdays. I hate Thursdays. It's a weird thing of mine, but I hate them. So if I don't have to do if it's something I don't want to do, like go to the DMV or talk to a doctor or do anything like that, 1 p.m. Thursday is when I tend to book that, because 1 p.m. is my golden time, and Thursday's not going to get any worse.
Right.
So
Right. I usually book my appointments on Fridays because that's the day I don't stream. So it's like go
yeah.
see your doctor, go see your therapist, take the cat to the vet. It's all on Fridays.
I mean, this is
But
all when
like
I
to be
left the
fair,
house.
like Thursday night is my Friday because I don't work Fridays. So I don't know. It's like booking things on your Saturday. I
Yeah.
don't know. Oh, someone's commenting. It's essentially Thursday continues to disappoint because you assign bad things to Thursday. So it's like a self actualizing like prophecy.
I don't see. I mean, I haven't gone anywhere in
A
a,
year.
a year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're pretty lucky in New Zealand when it comes to the whole COVID thing. So we haven't been in lockdown for that much. I think we did a 3-month lockdown, and then we're kind of soft. But we've been pretty much close to business, as close to normal as possible since last June.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But what happened is, during lockdown, when we couldn't leave anywhere, I realized that's my favorite, is not leaving the house. And so now
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to go. So I haven't booked anything on Thursdays in probably about a year, and I still hate Thursdays. So
Well, there you go. You've like narrowed it down, and now you know Thursdays are just not the day for you.
yeah.
Okay. We have a lot of things that we
Yeah.
typed out, but there's like at least 4, I think, AMA questions, so I want to
Yeah.
go check them out right quick. Which ones are from today? Um, so Grand Chicken Lord asks, maybe I just missed it, but during what years were you educating in San Francisco? I'm also wondering how difficult that was, given that some people were there because there were complaints about them.
Mm. So I was educating in San Francisco. I almost called it Trans Francisco, which is not
Trans
it at
Francisco.
all. But in
I think
San
we should all write
Francisco,
hashtag Trans Francisco in the chat now.
um, it was from 2000 to about 2005. that I was active there. I started to move out of America around 2005. Moved to New Zealand in 2007. So yeah,
How did you do it?
do what?
Like, are you a citizen of New Zealand? How did you get
I
out? Are you
uh
are your parents two different countries
no,
that
no.
came, like,
I moved to New Zealand to be with somebody. That relationship
oh,
didn't work out in a romantic sense, but they're now like my single most best friend ever, and we own a house together, and they're absolutely my rock, and they're amazing. And that confuses a lot of the older generation because they're like, I say all those things, and they're like, "And you got divorced? Why?" And I'm like, because there's no love. I mean, there's
mm-hmm.
no romantic love. There's
Yeah,
lots of love, but there's no romantic love. And yeah, we're both mature enough to go like, well, we can go find romantic love and we'll be best friends. This is great. But yeah, so I did that and they supported me through all of the immigration status. And I'm not yet a citizen, but I'm a permanent resident of New
okay.
Zealand. So
Congratulations. That's amazing.
yeah. Yeah. Um, basically, from my perspective, Bush got his second term, and I went, "Yo, I'm out."
Yeah,
um,
I
yeah.
hear that. I felt similarly about recent events and did my darndest to try and GTFO, but it did not work.
It was it
Unfortunately.
was it was. I should clarify. It's a bit more complex than that. The other situation was that, um, San Francisco was changing, and I
Ooh.
knew that a city that I was already struggling to survive in, um was going to become harder. So this beautiful art scene that was existing was starting to dwindle. Artists were being pushed out by high rents. Tech
Yep.
companies were coming in, and rents were even going higher. And I just went, you know what? I can't take on a fourth job. I'm working
I hear that.
2 full-time jobs plus doing a part-time job. I cannot take on a fourth job because stupidly my meat suit needs sleep sometimes and thus
Right.
I need to sleep. And yeah, so I started looking at various different ways to get out, and I knew somebody here in New Zealand, as I said, and I did research, and I was like, "Wow, that is a really cool country." I already knew one cool thing about New Zealand, which was New Zealand had the first trans person to be a member of parliament back in the 90s, and I
Nice.
knew that because that made front page news even in my small hick town in America, which, the headline was not so great, but, it was still a headline that made me realize that trans people existed and that there was one in New Zealand. And so I was like, okay, so they must be cool for trans people. Um, that must, and then I did more research and they legalized homosexuality in the 80s. And I was like, okay, so I'm feeling good. And I moved here and I have never regretted it. I think that it was only once I moved to New Zealand that I realized how much, for me personally, America is it was the nationality I was assigned to at birth, but not the nationality I identified with.
Yeah. I love that
And
distinction.
there was a real, like, from about I was in New Zealand about 3 weeks, and I went, "This is home.
Yep.
This is" that same for that we talk about that gender euphoria, I had national euphoria
Oh
at
gods.
at living here, and and this is now my home. So,
I yeah, I have a deep desire to relocate to a specific country, and it's like on my life goal bucket list to figure that out one day, but it's a multi-year process and takes lots of money, and until my children
does.
are of age, like, we're not going anywhere because we have co-parenting responsibilities.
Yeah.
So it's it's like maybe one day we'll retire in the country that I would prefer to be in, but for now, here I am.
Mm. Yeah, I'm lucky I don't have any of that. I'm just me. I'm unfettered by I mean, if I wanted to move to another country right now, all I would need is the resources. Um, and I the benefit of being a trans person from being very young is I'm used to being poor.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
that helps. Being used to being poor helps, is all I have to say. Because I would say, to give you an idea, over the 10 years of immigrating to New Zealand, I've probably put close to $7,000 into the immigration process.
Yep.
That doesn't include plane tickets, shipping things here, restart getting new things once I moved here. None of that. That's just the cost of immigration, like the paying for residency fees and immigration fees and all the different things that you have to pay. Yeah.
Everyone is getting swoony in chat about living in countries that they don't currently live in. I love it.
Okay, so I am the worst person to give advice about this because I ADHD'd, but I'm always like, if you can, just do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's never gonna be like, I just jumped. I moved to New Zealand. I had about $500 in savings, and somebody who I had met through the internet, but I had known them for 5 years, trusted that they were a pretty solid person, um, and that's it. I had no
Mm-hmm.
exit strategy. I had nothing.
Yep.
Um, not necessarily that I recommend it, but like sometimes you just gotta do it.
Yeah.
I'm generally one of those people though that doesn't let a lot of fear hold me back.
Mm-hmm. You know,
So,
so my wife and I got married last October, and we've sort of vaguely been talking about how one day we'd like to have a house. And I keep telling her, like, it's hard for me to dream about it and think about that being a thing in USA.
mm,
Like, we are so far behind on healthcare in general, trans healthcare specifically, and more. I would much rather we just keep renting until we can buy a place
mm,
where I actually want to like dig in and be for a long time.
yeah.
Um, anyway,
Let
that's a
let
whole
me
thing.
tell you, social health care is amazing. I didn't realize how much trauma I carried about healthcare
Mm-hmm.
until I moved to a country, like, where I could just go to the doctor when I was sick.
Yep.
Um, and it took me years. I was here about I've been here, yeah, so 13 years, going on 14 years. Um, and I think I did my math right. I might have done it wrong. I don't care. Um, I've been here quite a long time, and it took me about the first 5 years to just actually start going to the doctor,
Mm-hmm.
um, because I go to one of the most expensive doctors in the city because he's a really cool dude. He's really cool with trans stuff. He's really trusting, and he's really good with my pain management, stuff because I have juvenile it's not really juvenile arthritis anymore. I just keep calling it that, because I think it's just rheumatoid arthritis, but I've had it since I was 15.
Mm.
Um, which is usually, I think, why I say juvenile is to let people know I've had this for a very long time.
Yeah. You've had like a lifetime of arthritis.
Yeah. Um, and to give you an idea, like I said, he's the most expensive one of the, not the most. I think there are more expensive doctors, but I pay $55 to see him.
That's
New
very
Zealand,
reasonable.
$55 New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can see a doctor for free. We do have, I think, I don't know where we're at with with trans women bottom surgery, but I know that trans guy top surgery, we have like there's a waiting list you can go on to get it for free. Um,
Free
yeah,
top surgery.
yeah. There
Quick,
used to
everyone, move to New Zealand.
there used to be free bottom surgery for trans women. It was a very specific form, only one form and one guy, and I think he's been retired, so I don't know where they're at with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's a pretty cool country, like, to go from, like, roughly $900 in prescriptions a month, like, San Francisco had free-ish, like, I got my hormones for free in San Francisco, so
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to, but I do know that I've seen the bill for when I was moving here, what the cost of my hormones would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then moving to here where every prescription, if it's covered by the government, which most prescriptions are covered by the government, it's about $5 a
Wow,
prescription.
that's
So,
amazing.
and most prescriptions are for 3 months. So, for example, for my estrogen, it's $5 every 3 months. For my progesterone, $5 every 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Spironolactone, $5 every 3 months.
So
So,
that's $60 a year to have all of your HRT needs met.
hmm
That's amazing. Wow.
hmm
I can't even imagine that. Like,
but it's 5 times 12 to keep my brain on track
uh-huh.
because I have to get a new prescription every month. So,
That's fair.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
Ninquendo says $5 barely gets you a Band-Aid in the United States.
yeah, I remember. Like the other thing is we have ACC here, which is called accident compensation something else. I don't know. It's ACC. We call it ACC. But
Mm-hmm.
basically, if you've had an accident, you're covered. All of your treatment for that is covered. An
Mm-hmm.
accident is anything that's not like if you fall down and break your wrist, that's an accident. If you trip over your own foot, that's an accident. Like anything's an accident.
If you drop a
And
ladder on the hood of your car
well, does it only if it injures you?
and it hits you in the head,
um, yeah,
that's an accident.
that that's an accident. Like, and so yeah, we have pretty cool. Like, I kind of watching the presidential elections and the American elections from afar, and they're like social healthcare, social healthcare. I'm like, is amazing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why. Oh yeah, that's right, because you guys all make money off your insurance companies. But yeah.
So it looks like there's a question for Brooklyn. Is it easy to get surgeries and high importance hospital visits? I've heard that sometimes the waits can be wild.
It depends on the importance. I have had a surgery that I had to wait a year for.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a kind of minor surgery. I was uncomfortable occasionally, and it needed to be fixed. On the other hand, my boyfriend just had to have corneal cross hatching. I think it's
Ooh.
cross linking.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't describe it because it's squicky, but it has to do with your eye.
Yeah.
And he went in for his GP, general practitioner, his
Mm-hmm.
his doctor that he works with, referred him to the general public system. Um, and
Ophthalmologist.
yeah, well, it's actually not an ophthalmologist; it's another eye specialist. But yeah, and that took about 3 months to get that appointment. He went in for that appointment, and he had the surgery. He's just had the surgery, which was about a month later. I think it was actually a little under a month later. Um, and that's all through the social health care. There is the
Mm-hmm.
option in New Zealand still to go private to get insurance. We still have private health care. It's not all social health care. Obviously, the other thing is that I come from a perspective of in New Zealand, I pass as white. My boyfriend is white as well. Race, unfortunately, does sometimes slow things down. Class can slow things down,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, because New Zealand is still a realistic country. It's not a
Yeah.
fantasy land where racism
Right.
and classism doesn't exist. Um,
Right.
so
So it's like there's a safety net, but there's still
yeah,
capitalism
yeah,
and racism and
exactly.
sexism and
Yeah.
all the other things.
And I can only speak from my experience, but my experience has been pretty solid from the social healthcare perspective. One of the things that would benefit from that compared to other New Zealanders is that as an American, I'm more prone to speak my mind and be
Mm-hmm.
direct,
Mm-hmm.
whereas New Zealanders tend to be a more passive um, kind of people, like
Yeah.
overall, and so they're less
I've
likely
been in
to.
some foreign countries where that's been a thing too. Yep.
If you're familiar with England, it's very similar to their kind of like very
Yeah.
kind of passive,
Well, didn't England
less likely to
colonize New
speak.
Zealand?
Yes, yes, they
So,
did.
I mean, England colonized all kinds of places, Canada and a bunch more.
most of the
So
world.
yeah, so that like the English culture is
Mm.
everywhere, and then the Americans are like the fuck you, England. We're gonna do our own
Mm.
colonizing thing over here.
The interesting story of New Zealand has an interesting history with the colonization because originally originally Australia, not Australia, England. Originally, England wasn't going to colonize New Zealand. And they New Zealand had its own sovereignty and was its own sovereign nation and had an agreement with New Zealand. And then capitalism happened, and a guy sold a bunch of plots here and shipped a bunch of people here to start a new life in New Zealand. And the British government basically had to go, oh crap, we need to do something fast.
Mm-hmm.
And that kicked off an actual colonization process.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how history would have gone. Otherwise, they possibly still could have ended up colonizing, but originally New Zealand. There was a shift between the time when Australia and America and a lot of the other countries were colonized, and when um, English people came to New Zealand, and that shift was basically in England. They started thinking about native peoples with more respect and going, hey, what if we treated them like people and not savages?
Mm-hmm.
That's a concept.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah.
I'm interested to talk more about. So one of the things you mentioned is you live in a Polynesian country, and both
Mm.
Maori and Samoans have trans narratives in their pre-colonization lives. Do you know enough about those trans narratives to share some of the
Yeah,
stories or some of the cultural stuff?
I do. I know. A surface level enough that I would be able to. I feel comfortable talking about them. I'm
Mm-hmm.
obviously no expert, and these are not my. While I am an Indigenous woman from a Native American tribe, I am not Polynesian.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to give those caveats. This is just my experience of being a trans person who I have done a little bit of trans activism in New Zealand when I first moved here, and have interacted with Polynesian cultures. And it's really interesting. And in that, for example, in the Maori culture, they have a word for trans women that predates colonization, which is called whakawahine.
Ooh, how
Um,
do we spell that?
what it's WHAKAWAHINE. And Faka means to be like, and Wahine means woman. So to be like woman. And a lot of yet again, because of colonization, not all Maori know this anymore because they have been very heavily Christianized. But originally, Whakawahine was a respected role. She helped. She was considered outside of the sins of male or female, and so could
Mm-hmm.
help and assist the holy men.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't. I have to apologize. I don't know necessarily what their actual terminology for holy men was. But or they could also help and assist chiefs and leaders of the various different tribes, or the what are called iwis here,
Mm-hmm.
the various different iwis. And so it was a very interesting kind of uh, history. Trans men, unfortunately, don't have that history here. And the reverse fakatane, which means to be like man, is actually usually reserved for a dominant or butch woman or lesbian. And yet again, that comes from their history of the first person to use the word fakatane was uh, a, for lack of a better term, a princess, who um, the men were either out. I can't remember whether the men were out in a war or most of them had died, and there was a thing that had happened that only men could traditionally do, and she was like, well, I'm going to be like a man and go get basically go get shit done.
Mm,
So she went out there and did that. And she actually Whakatane is a name of a place here in New Zealand now, named after her. And
that's rad.
she became known as Whakatane, almost as her name in history. But there's also histories of there's talks about queerness. There's the one of the famous the greatest Maori love story is about these two uh these two lovers. But one of the parts of the story is that she takes on the clothes of his male best friend to help seduce him, which historians now think was
Sounds
because
gay.
he was quite gay or bisexual. Yeah.
I love it.
And the relationship with his friend is considered a very homoerotic homosexual relationship. Um so um yeah. And then within Polynesian culture, they have Fa'afafini. And Fa'afafini are an interesting concept in that they are. Mm, I'm trying best to figure out how to describe this. A Fa'afafini in Samoa in Samoan culture is assigned male at birth, not necessarily living as a woman, but feminine and or taking the place of a daughter in a family thing. So they're more feminine, more soft. And despite what people think, Fa'afafini grew up to be heterosexual. They grew up to be gay men. Some Fa'afafini do transition to become women as they get older. I mean that is common in 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 sorry, the train just like took off while I was still on the tracks. So
That's okay.
yeah, so Fa'afafini is a more complex term. There is as transitioning and being a trans woman is becoming more popular in our not more popular in our society, more accepted, and so more people are transitioning than they have in the past. Um, there is talk on whether a trans woman who was a Fa'afafini is still Fa'afafini as a trans woman if she medically transitions.
Mm.
So
So would you say
yeah.
Fa'afafini is some sort of non-binary in-between state?
Yeah, and it's very much it can be a transitional state for some people. I mean, in some, like for example, a heterosexual male might still identify as Fa'afafini as an adult. He might not. It's really up to the individual. It's a really interesting kind of um concept. Unfortunately, yet again, the heavy Christianity that's been pushed through these cultures has erased some of this, and they're in the process of relearning it. But on the island of Samoa itself, it's a bit stronger. Yeah. Um, sorry, I'm just looking at the questions in the AMA.
Oh,
To the
that's okay.
best of my knowledge, there isn't a non-binary narrative in Maori culture. Um, there wasn't. Well, there were some things that were only like from a what they would use as the word Maori would use as tapu, which is kind of like sacred or sacrilegious. Like for example, like you don't sit on tables. That's tapu. Here, you don't put your feet on a pillow. That's tapu, or you don't sit on a pillow. That's tapu. Um, these are they're I'm just trying to explain kind of like it's not what we would consider sacred or sacrilegious in the
Mm-hmm.
same way. But there were some things like specifically pulling in the canoes that was only for men, and it was tapu for a woman to do it. And that's specifically one of the things that Whakatane did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Other than that, it was a pretty women worked in the fields, women could go to war sometimes. The gender wasn't as strictly binary in the same ways that we think of it nowadays, where there were things. Yeah. But to the best of my knowledge, there isn't no non-binary narrative in Maori culture. I am not very familiar with all of the Maori gods. I will admit that. So there might be that tends to be where in indigenous cultures that you find, in my opinion, more of those non-binary characters.
Mm-hmm. So I think when we were preparing for stream, the topic of two spirit came up. Would you
Yep.
say that being two spirit is a specifically like North American indigenous person's identity? And can you
Yes.
speak more to that?
Yeah, so it very much centers from a North American indigenous culture. And not I don't even know if it's through all of the indigenous cultures of North America, because I think from a
Yeah.
white perspective, people tend to think of Native Americans as one
Right.
people.
Yeah, no. It's so
They're
many.
not.
Yeah.
I like to describe it as more like, Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Various different, the Sioux and say the Potawatomi, I'm Potawatomi, are very different cultures, very
Mm-hmm.
different religions and backgrounds, and from very different parts of the world. And
Yeah.
before white people probably would have never interacted that much.
Mm-hmm.
Because the other thing is, while Native Americans were nomadic, they're not nomadic in what people. Yet again, I find that a lot of people think when we say that some Native Americans were nomadic, they think, oh, they marched from East Coast to West Coast. But it's really they kind of stayed within, like I'm from the Potawatomi were from Michigan. They basically stayed within Michigan in that general area, Michigan and Ontario and stuff. Um, but yeah, so Two Spirit, I can speak from my culture that Two Spirit is something that we have, and it is the idea that in Native American culture, every single thing, every rock, everything has a spirit, and that spirit is male or female. Um, and Two Spirit is this identity that there are people who are born who have both of those spirits within inside them. These are gay people, lesbian people, bisexual people, trans people, and they all presented and lived within the tribe in different ways. But one of the things that I think is really like the Whakawahine, a Two Spirit was held up a high in native culture, because the benefit of having two spirits within you is that you can naturally talk to the female spirits and the male spirits, so you can naturally talk to everything the within the world that you need to encounter with. So very commonly they were used, they became spiritual leaders,
Mm-hmm.
or would assist spiritual leaders or help out with spiritual leaders, because they were well respected. um and yeah, and in that way, Two Spirit is a very non-binary kind of term, and people lived how they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, so yeah. um I'm always really careful about talking about my native experience, because yeah, as I said before, I pass as white, and I'm aware of
Mm-hmm.
that. um I don't put photos of me up in regalia. I mean, I don't have a much chance to wear regalia anymore, and I don't even actually own any regalia, because bringing any regalia that I would own to New Zealand would be next to impossible because of biosecurity laws. Um,
Mm. Okay.
but if I did, like when I was living in San Francisco, I mean, social media wasn't a huge thing. We had MySpace, and I don't like to post things like that, and that's yet again, it's a my personal thing of that I know that there's a potential that I'll be read as white, and I don't want to make other people feel like appropriation's okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's my personal stance. Everyone's
Mm-hmm.
different. If I'm not in a space where I can have a conversation about my identity, about how I'm native, I am actually 50% native. Um, my mother is Irish. My father is native. Um, my brother, if you put him next to me, we don't look related at all. He has a very different skin tone because he very much follows my dad's path. But it is an identity that's important to me. So, I mean, because it's who I am. And I grew up very connected to my culture. My grandparents lived on a reservation. I would go visit them. I uh, went to powwows and other various events as a child. So,
I have been to with at the invitation of my indigenous roommate at the time, I have been to some really heckin' cool powwows,
mm,
and I really like the drumming.
mm.
I feel it in my like chest and my body, and it's good.
One of the things I like about New Zealand, just warning, we're getting a little woo woo for people here, um, is that as
I
a
love
native
woo
person,
woo.
I feel very connected to the earth. Um, and one of the things about New Zealand is because it is a country that has 60 million sheep and like only 5 million people. um, like I think we're actually under 5 million to be really, um, and for the size of like to give you the idea, New Zealand, because you'll hear all the time in America, oh, but New Zealand is just a tiny little country, a tiny little country. New Zealand is about the size of 3 Floridas,
Hmm.
I think it is. We're
Mm-hmm.
actually pretty big. If you're not looking at the like, I don't think I have to explain to people that the rectangular map that you see actually is all disproportionate and makes America look really big and Africa look really small and all those other kind of things. But
Yeah.
and one of the places that gets kind of shafted is New Zealand, if we're even on the map.
Yeah. If when
9 out of 10 times
colonizers
we're
make the
not on the map.
maps,
Yeah,
they draw it real funny.
yeah, yeah. Um, and um, yeah, and so because of that, I feel a much stronger connection to the earth. I feel like a lot of the capitalism of America has severed a lot of that kind of spirit from the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And often it felt like walking on a corpse. I mean, obviously there's
Yeah.
places where that doesn't feel that way, but even here in New Zealand, even in a city like I live in, I still feel quite connected and I can feel that kind of strength and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so, and that's one of the things I think that made me feel really home here. Um, yeah.
Oh, I love I love the earth being alive.
Mm,
So in my bouncing around somewhere, in my spiritual tradition, we also value um, not only doing land acknowledgments, but also like learning about the cultures of the persons whose land is being occupied, and
mm,
like financially giving back or giving
yeah.
forward or paying rent. There's a lot of ways to state that phrase, and so I just plunked a little resource in the chat here, native-land.ca. It is a way for
Yeah.
you to look at where you are on a map and see how many different of these, independent nations whose land you're occupying simultaneously.
Mm,
So that's one simple resource to just learn more about, where you are. And one day when COVID restrictions lift and everyone's healthy and you're traveling, you can also learn
mm,
about where you are when you're somewhere else. So like when people ask me where I'm from, I'm tempted to say like indigenous insert people here place instead of like the actual like colonizer name. Um,
mm.
yeah,
In New Zealand, that's a very big thing too, recognizing the iwi that has uh mana and whenua. Mana is the like spirit and power, and whenua is um ancestry. And that they have connected to the land. And like I said, still a colonized white majority government, so we don't do things as well, but it is definitely becoming even more and more common. Um, uh, in New Zealand, to be kind of respected, you have to kind of be able to do an introduction in Te Reo Maori.
nice.
You can do the rest of your speech in Te Reo Pakeha, but you have to do your and that includes like talking about where you're from and where you harken back to, and um I, the Maori way of introducing yourself is that I'm from, my name is Brooklyn, I'm from I live in this place in New Zealand, which belongs, and this is the rivers, and this is the mountains, and this is the trees that connect me to my land, and this is my where my home is, and this is sometimes this is who my grandparents were, or this is who blah 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 was.
Mhm.
And recognizing that we stand here not just as ourselves, but as our history and those who came
Yeah.
before us.
We're the
You know,
lineage of those who came before.
yeah,
Mhm.
and in the trans community, I like to do that too. I'm sitting here as a trans woman, but I'm also sitting here for all the trans women who came before me.
Mhm.
And they go back, mo- thousands and thousands of years, and we're constantly finding more evidence of trans people. You know, uh, the goddess Selene, um,
Mhm.
often had trans women as worshippers because she's one of the goddesses that only had female worshippers, and she would have, um, you know, the wording that was used at the time, wasn't trans woman, but she would have women, and she would have men who castrated themselves and lived as women,
Yeah.
i.e., a trans woman.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and then you had, yeah, like the history goes on. You have castrati from the opera, which some of them were forced into that, which is awful, but some of them willfully chose those roles, and some of those people who performed as castrati lived day to day as women. um you know um yeah, trans I just yeah. And I mean, all the way down to the reason we can use a computer is because of trans women. Like, I don't know how many people realize that Lynn Conway like invented like the way that we use microchips in computers while working at IBM, and she was fired for transitioning in the 60s,
Mm.
and then was forced into living as stealth in order to be able to build her career. I mean, she's literally written the book, like the textbook on how to work with this kind of chips and stuff, and
Yeah.
some technical stuff I don't know. um uh Unfortunately for her, but lucky enough for many of us, she in the 90s was outed. And so she was going to be outed, but she outed herself instead. And then started doing trans activism, which is one of the great resources. She used to have this really great website that was like famous trans women, and or it was something better name like that. It might still actually exist, but she was one of the first trans advocates that had stuff on the internet in the early 90s, and it wasn't porn or it wasn't sensational.
Yeah.
And even more so, it focused on successful trans women who weren't hairdressers, drag queens, sex workers,
Mhm.
etc. And that was one of the pivotal, because when I transitioned, we didn't have YouTube. We didn't have There were a few trans guys. I think there were two trans guys that I knew of that had like GeoCities websites that they were documenting their transitions with. I didn't know of many trans women that had that. We had IRC chat rooms, which could sometimes be filled with creepers. Um, there wasn't a lot out there. It was really difficult. I feel really quite lucky that for me personally, I knew, like, I
Mhm.
just like the first time I saw a trans woman, which was on Jerry Springer.
Wow.
um, I knew. I saw like I remember watching Jerry Springer, and this person said, "Yeah, I was born as I was assigned male at birth, and I've had all these surgeries, and I live as a woman now." And I just went, "You can do that?"
Yeah.
N- Next day, Brooklyn was born. I think,
I love that.
um, and it was a very very cut and dry thing for me. It's one of the like I respect everyone, but, like, I don't understand non-binary. Like, as in, it doesn't make sense to me because my gender is so solidly
Mhm.
female. Um, I respect everyone, like, I want um, but that was one of the things that I've always been like, "What?" Like, this is my this this is the person who speaks on non-binary because I don't understand it and I don't feel it's my place to talk about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's part of why I've been wanting to. One, I switched my overlay from like rainbows to non-binary flag because I'm
mm,
like, oh, there's a lot of gay people. You know what? There's less of non-binary people
mm,
specifically. Like
mm,
I'm realizing that's the thing that I do that is not everyone is doing this thing. So I'm trying to lean into that more. But
yeah.
there's actually like 4 different threads that I want to pick up on that you've been talking about, if that's okay.
So, yeah. Um, yeah, I just want to just yeah, I like to tell this to give you an idea of how solid like woman and female my identity is that I have these moments where I'll be doing something and I'll be like, "Oh," like, you know, um, I'll sit on, you know, genital bits or whatnot when I'm trying to do something. I'm like, "Oh, how does my blank cis friend deal with this? I should talk to her about how she deals with her bits." And then I go, "Oh, yeah, that's right. She doesn't have those
Hmm.
because that's like, that's not normal." I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
It's not
I
cis.
am yeah, I'm trans, I'm different, um, and that she is cis, and she is different, but, like, I forget that all the time. I used to be married to a trans guy, and you would just forget that other heterosexual couples weren't like us, and that they like, that the if one of them got pregnant, it wasn't going to be the guy that got pregnant. I that's just, like, how my brain works because I'm just see myself so strongly as female. The way I
Hmm.
always describe it is I've always known I was a woman, it just took me, till I was 19 to convince the rest of the world that that was true.
Yeah,
Oh.
I hear that. Um, okay, a couple of things. So you mentioned the person who invented the computer chips and having to be in the closet in stealth mode and all these different pieces. And
Mm,
I just wanted to acknowledge that there is actually a really big trend of trans women specifically, I would say, being really good software engineers. And so like my wife is a software engineer at a big name company. Hooray. So long story
yay.
longer, um
Mm,
I love that you dropped the Wikipedia link. I'm going to plunk this in the chat here. Long story longer, I think there is a lineage of trans women programmers. There
mm,
is something about uh, the way brains are. I think there is a lot of comorbidity between neurodiversity and transness,
mm,
and often, especially autism brains, maybe also other brains, are very good at the computer thing, like the programming,
mm.
the A plus B equals C, whatever, that whole. I am not that, but my wife super duper is. And so she will someday come on my show and talk all about that, I'm sure. Um, so, yes, I love that you brought up Lynn Conway.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I don't know if it's on here, but she had a website back in the 90s. I don't know what it was called. I can't remember it, but it was a great resource for trans women, for me as a trans woman trying to yeah, trying to figure out, what my options were. Um, I will be the first to admit when I transitioned, I had like this was 2001, 2000
Mm-hmm.
slash 2001, and I had other trans women tell me that I was too young to know whether I should transition or not, and that I
Oh,
should wait
that's
5
gatekeepy.
years.
Fuck, that's
A lot of that's
wrong.
changed. A lot of that has changed, thank goodness, and I think it was just literally people being too scared that I was too young,
Mm-hmm.
um, to understand that, that what was required, and I was just like, "Pff, you might have needed to wait till you were 40, but I didn't." Like, and not that coming out when you're 40 is bad, like, you should come out whenever you're ready, and it's never too late, but, like, I really, it was really rough, and then the other thing I had because I was young and I was on hormones so young, I had this great thing where I was really passable, right?
Mm.
And the hatred that I would get from other trans women was really, really probably some of the hardest that I'd have to deal with, because you'd
Mm-hmm.
go to like, so in San Francisco, there were two trans clinics that you could go to, and I went to one of the two trans clinics, and it was a specific day. You saw, there were a few doctors who did it. It was kind of the undercover way to get onto hormones, because you didn't have to go see a psychologist and everything
Mm-hmm.
else, and you could just, and you, the best thing for me was that it was free, like,
Yeah.
um, um, and I'd walk down the halls and just would have this muttering of fish, fish, fish behind me, which was just the worst feeling. And it's one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that I've always, like, I vowed very young that I would never, if I ever had a community, or if I was ever working with trans people, um, that I would never, let a fellow trans person feel that they were under attack from me for being whatever type of trans they were, whether they was prettier than me, or more masculine than me, or more feminine than me, or, you know, more talented than me, because it was really hard to feel like some of your greatest, some of your biggest enemies were people who should be allies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm reminded of how like internalized sexism and the way the patriarchy has set up at least the American workplace, how like cis women particularly will infight and tear each other down,
Mm,
because it's like only one cis woman can get ahead in any one company because there's like the token one spot for a cis woman. And
yeah.
so, there's that, like it's like there's not enough room for everyone. And so when we can let go of excuse me, when we can 1 month on tea, my voice is going to do that for months. When we can let go of um, the scarcity mindset that there's only enough room for one of us and start supporting
Mm,
each other, like that's when real change happens, right? Like um if the United States wasn't so caught up in race wars right now, if we were having a class war, we would win.
mm,
Like the 99% would kick the 1%'s butt so hard, and we're being so distracted and drawn down by the very important conflict we're having about race and racism. Like Black Lives Matter, we absolutely need to support all people of color, not
absolutely.
just Black people, especially. Like stop Asian hate, all of that too, yes. And the 1% is really glad that we're distracted by this other stuff because
Yeah.
it means we're not
And
coming
they'll
after
keep
their
us
money.
distracted.
Yeah, they
And
will.
they'll keep us get distracted. And
So
they'll keep
that's
us hating the other people. They'll
yeah.
try to continually turn the Black and BIPOC community against the queer community. They'll constantly try to turn the LGB against the T.
Yep.
It's what they do, and
Yep.
it makes sense, because if we are all busy fighting each other with infighting and backstabbing, we don't realize that we're not a minority.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, once, if you can get the Black and the BIPOC community together, and the trans community and the gay community and the neurodivergent and the
Mhm.
disabled community all together, and more communities that I am forgetting because I can't think of them right now. But if
Yeah.
you got them all together, you'd realize that it's like a very stacked fight against the majority
Mhm.
of
Yeah, the
society.
people in power. Totally.
Mm,
Well, and that's why like leftist politics and like mutual aid is such an important thing. Like at least especially in the United States, like our
mm,
healthcare system is completely broken, and so we have to do mutual aid. We have to take care of each other because the government isn't going to do it. And so,
mm,
there's a lot of leftist organizing, and I have some pals who are, more deeply, that's their special interest or special focus or topic. And,
mm,
I try to do what I can to show up in their community and educate about trans, because that's my, like, trans and non binary is my special topic. And so, like, building bridges between these communities and interacting with each other and advising each other, and supporting each other in the ways we can, like,
mm,
the more knowledge there is out there, the better we can do. Like, I know last year there were a bunch of like use your body, go be in person like protests happening in the middle of pandemic. I'm disabled. I am non-binary. I like physically I am not that strong. I am not that resource to
Mm,
go stand and hold a sign. And so I realized what I can do is a lot of the online organizing, right? I can like
mm,
educate people, share information with people. And so I've been working really hard on like cross educating folks. That's the thing that I can do. You know, not everyone
mm.
has money, not everyone has like a super strong body, but like there's other stuff we can do. And I just want to encourage all the comrades out there, whatever your level, whatever the thing is you can do, just do one blessed thing. Just one, like, I don't care if you believe in God or not, it's fine. Just blessed, like one thing, one small
Mm.
action, even if you can do it once a week, once a day, like helps us liberate all peoples from oppression.
And if you have even like any type of platform or any type of privilege, if you are white, lift up the black voices. Make
Yep.
sure that they're like, I'm big on amplifying
Mm-hmm.
voices of those who I can't speak for.
Yep.
Um but also knowing when it's my turn to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is my job to educate my racist relatives.
Mm-hmm.
Like not my BIPOC friends,
Right.
you know? And if I know I have racist relatives, it is then my job to if they refuse to be educated, to keep them away from my BIPOC friends. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't need that shit.
That's right.
But I'm big on a retweet takes 2 seconds,
It does.
you know? Quote tweets take 5. Like,
Yep.
amplify those voices around you. And if you don't have voices around you to amplify,
Find them.
find some.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not just because it's the good thing to do, but because you are so much richer more diverse voices that you have around you. The more diverse in ability, the more diverse in race, the more diverse in sexuality and gender. It will always highlight and heighten your own life.
Yeah. Oh, this is such a good and juicy conversation. I'm having such a good time. Um, so one thing that someone said a couple minutes ago, Mirami said, I'm incredibly lucky to have had the opportunity to take a language class with local First Nation elders and would recommend folks to see if there's anything like that available. It's an incredible way to learn through
Mm,
culture, through language. So, one way to decolonize oneself if you are white or not indigenous and some form of colonizer, because colonizers come in many colors, not just white.
mm,
Learn the languages, keep them alive. I love that you shared, Brooklyn, about introducing yourself in Maori, and
mm.
that is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and use the um understand the languages that people use for themselves and what they mean and stuff. One of my favorite things is that Maori means basically normal or um like same as myself. So like we use this word Maori, that's this indigenous Polynesian tribe when they're just like, we're the normal ones, you're the weirdos who moved here. Like
Mm-hmm.
um and New Zealand is pretty lucky that they had that we have one treaty, and over time it's being more and more reinforced. But yeah, learning the language is. I really want to second what that person said, because it's also really important. For example, as I said before, my race, my nationality is Potawatomi.
Mm-hmm.
Is the tribe that I belong to. And about 10 years ago, there were like 10 people who knew the language.
Mm-hmm.
Like like Cherokee, like, yeah, that one's not gonna die. It was written down. But a lot of languages weren't written. A lot of native languages were not written down. Um, and they're only being written down now, because we're trying to save them. Um, because they didn't have Bibles written for them. That's the big like as much as I hate colonization, because I do, and especially the Christian evangelical kind of colonization that happened. The one benefit of that is that in order to convert these people, you had to write a Bible in their language, and
Mm-hmm.
so languages were written down. Um,
Yep.
uh, but a lot of languages haven't been written down. Find out what your local uh, nation would be, and see if they have a language courses, or like a lot of them are going online nowadays, and they even have like pronunciation charts and dictionaries. There's a wealth of knowledge online. Educate yourself on whose land you're on, or who the natives tend to, or at least my tribe tends to talk about protectors of land. We don't believe in land ownership.
Yep.
Um, very different to Maori. Maori don't really believe in land ownership either, but they definitely believe in a connection to a specific part of land. Um, and so, yeah, like, like find out whose land you're on, because most likely, unless you're from Europe or England, you're probably on someone else's land.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they have stories about that land. You know, learn about learn about things like Mount Rushmore, which was a sacred mountain to Native Americans at one
Yeah.
point, and it was deeply protested that it be turned into some tourist trap of four mediocre white guys. Like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, learn that stuff. That's a really good way to start. And I think it's really important. Like, not everyone who came to America came of their own free will or are part of are active colonizers. But if you are not native, you are part of colonization. If you're in New
Yep.
Zealand, in America,
Yeah.
like, you were part of that.
Yeah.
And
Um.
for the love of God, stop celebrating Thanksgiving.
Yes. And Columbus Day.
Learn.
Stop.
Hmm?
Just stop.
What was
In
the
the
other one?
U.S., we have Columbus Day as well, which is
Yeah.
even worse than Thanksgiving.
Oh, just learn about the truth behind Thanksgiving. The first Thanksgiving was celebrating the bloodshed of Native Americans. The
Mm-hmm.
very first time in American culture the words Thanksgiving were used. I think the second time too. The third time might have been close to what you've been told in school. But like there's a really good, just in general, there's a really, really good book out there to start with, which is, I think it's like Everything I Wasn't Taught in School, and it basically tells you about all the lies you were told in school, because you were told a lot of lies. America is a big propaganda machine.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of American propaganda that you'll be like, guess what? The Wright brothers weren't the first to fly a plane. They
Mm.
were the first white people to fly a plane.
Yep. Um. So, uh, I want to mention that there is a movement in the United States to rename Columbus Day Indigenous Persons Day or
Mm.
Indigenous Peoples Day. And I've definitely seen, when the day comes around in the fall, like there's artwork, there's flyers, there's things that go around. And so that's at least what we observe in my household. This is
Sorry, I
so
got
much fun.
mildly distracted by a dog.
That's, trans people can love dogs and talk about Indigenous culture all in one day.
Yeah.
Hashtag trans agenda. Oh, okay. So there's like at least three different things that I have written that we could talk about. But is there anything
Mm.
top of your mind that you were grooving on you want to continue to talk about?
I'm happy to go wherever you or chat wants to go. Yeah.
Okay. So one thing that I've been sort of up to lately is I realized that I have all this like cool information because we talked about how not every trans person is going to be a trans advocate, and so I
Mm.
realized like not everyone is spending their whole day thinking about this stuff and like finding resources. And so I
Mm.
have started like writing these little blurbs and either tweeting them and or like finding appropriate channels in people's Discord servers to plunk them in. and
Mm,
I quickly found myself with a bunch of eggs. Trans eggs,
yes.
neurodiverse eggs, all the eggs.
I have
Everyone's
to
like, I might be this thing. And I'm like, oh, yay.
I have to say that I had never heard of that term until probably about 2 years ago.
Hmm.
And I don't know how long it's been in use, but I absolutely love it. I love the little egg
Yeah.
thing.
There's even a
So
subreddit called Egg IRL where you can go look at like memes by trans people who are like, I'm new at being trans, or maybe this person will eventually realize they're trans, and it's
yeah,
adorable.
yeah.
So one of the things we did over the weekend, which is why I worked all weekend essentially, is we made 4 new questioning channels for folks who are trying to figure themselves
I
out.
saw that.
Yeah, it's so
I
cool.
think I was gonna help, and then I realized that you had done it all while I was asleep. So
It's all good. Different time zones, like you do.
yeah.
So currently we have questioning gender, questioning sexuality, questioning disability, and questioning neurodiversity. So if you think maybe it applies to you, but you're not sure, and so you don't feel comfortable like taking up space in like insider spaces, we actually have just made those spaces for you to come and share your story. And our the main piece of writing that we ended up doing is talking about how like we're not here to diagnose or label folks, like we're here to listen to your experiences
Mm,
and share our experiences, and like everyone gets to label or identify or not label as they prefer, and no one's here to
mm,
like police or like tone police or like gatekeep and
mm.
tell you what you can and can't do. Like we believe very strongly in self-identification, self-diagnosis, because of how gatekeepy like healthcare can be. Not
Yeah.
everyone has the money to go get a formal diagnosis of whatever. So, anyway, so that's a whole new thing that we're taking on. If you are questioning, or if you are really solid in your identity and want to do some like direct community support and love up and embrace those who are at the beginning of their journeys figuring this stuff out, like please join our Discord server. Um, the information is in my link tree, and I also just plunked it here in the chat. We're having some really juicy conversations in a good way already. It's very cool.
Mm. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So one question we had a couple weeks ago that I haven't answered yet on stream, and I also don't know if you let me know if you feel like this is one you would feel comfortable answering, or if you feel like
Mm.
you don't know. Is some folks wonder if they are ever too old to start transitioning. Do you have any thoughts on like the evolving gender understandings later in life? Like, not that you're ancient or anything, but just like there's
I
at least
feel
one
it.
person in my community who's like, in their 50s, and they're like, I'm too old. It's
Mm.
too late to start now. And I disagree with them, but I'm also in my 30s. So like, what does my word mean to them? Nothing.
So, like, if we go with the whole egg philosophy, all right, which we're going with, my fellow hatchlings, sorry, my voice just did a weird, like, high pitched squeak. I don't know what that was about. But my fellow hatchlings that transitioned with roughly around the same time, we're all women who were in their 40s or 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is that accurate? Sorry. I have to like filter through young person brain of everyone over the age of 25 is ancient and near death's door. Like, yeah, I don't know if you thought that same thing, but like I'm going back sometimes. I'm like, wow, they actually weren't that old. They were, but
Yeah.
in my head, I was like, wow, they're so old. Um, but they were people that were transitioning at the same time. And that was actually more common when I transitioned. When I transitioned, there were no resources for young people
Mm-hmm.
transitioning. There was no understanding for young people transitioning. And I feel like we've kind of gone the opposite way because when you transition as an older person, even in your 30s, it's a different set of risks. You have a more established life that you're potentially going to lose, for example.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a real
but
thing
my personal
for sure.
philosophy in general is that you're never too late to do anything ever. Like there are fashion models who started modeling in their 70s. like,
Mm-hmm.
and they're on runway shows. Like, I know several other trans women who have transitioned in their 50s, 60s currently, like, um, my thing is, like, there's no tomorrow. Like, there's no guaranteed tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you wanna live the rest of your life? Like, if today's your last day, do you wanna live it authentically and being happy? Or do you want to just, hide more? And I mean, that's ultimately a decision that every person has to make for themselves. And fair enough if you want to hide for the rest of your life, because you know what? Being trans isn't a walk in the park. Like, I love it. I absolutely like being trans is been just one of the most amazing things for my life and has opened so many doors that I don't think would have normally been opened. Um, but like it is rough at times,
Mm-hmm.
and it is difficult, especially um for trans women in our society. It's can be really hard. Um, we don't like male assigned people at birth who are feminine. Our society doesn't like that.
Yeah,
We
because they're
absolutely
giving up
deride all
social power, and why would you ever
yeah,
choose that? Because it's not a choice.
yeah, and because we also deride anything feminine. It's actually that's a whole nother side topic, like, as a Game of Thrones fan, like, the way that the fandom treated Sansa Stark, who I thought was a very powerful, strong character in a feminine way, compared to, like, your fighting characters. Um, we don't like femininity, and we don't like seeing femininity as anything but weakness,
Mm.
which I don't think is true, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Um uh, but in the long run, like, it's never too late to do anything, and one of my favorite things to bring up about this thing is whenever people are like, "Oh, it's too late." Samuel L. Jackson is our highest grossing actor, just, like, the highest grossing. He has made
Mm-hmm.
his movies have made $27 billion. Like, he is the single when we look financially, the single most successful actor that we have had,
Yeah,
and he never was in a movie till he was 43.
I love that. Also, I love that
His
you know
first
that.
His first mo I'm turning 40, so I have this big thing of, like and I've just restarted a career and I'm starting, so I'm kind of also, like, people who got like, Vera Wang is one of the most successful wedding dress designers out there right now, like, most people who know things about wedding dresses know Vera Wang. She's very well known.
Yeah.
She didn't start her own label till she was 40. Or I think 45, you know? Mm, It's never too late to start. It's never too late to start, in my opinion. It's never too late to start over, whether that's career-wise, it's never too late to follow your dreams,
Yeah.
because every day forward is better, and for me personally, I can like I said, I can only um, speak from my perspective. The benefits that have come from living my authentic, true self vastly outweigh the negatives that come with being trans.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing on that topic.
Yeah, I think it's an important one because I think like I said, it's a real interesting shift because when I transitioned, finding young people who had transitioned and finding resources for young people and trying to explain to older people who had transitioned when they were older that our needs were different. Like, trying to explain like, yeah, we both might lose our house, but one of us has a career and ability to make money, and one of us is 15. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
those were big deals back then. But now it seems because as our society has shifted and become more acceptable, an overall more acceptable place for trans people, and queer people in general. Um, More and more people are coming out younger, and we're supporting more and more people younger, you know? People who haven't gone through puberty are able to go on puberty blockers until they can transition,
Oh
medically
God,
transition
what
at
a
a later
gift, huh?
date. Like, oh
Yeah.
god, exactly.
Like
Like
give the kids puberty blockers if they ask for them, for serious.
yeah.
Like
Yeah,
even even if they change their mind later and they decide to just have whatever they're assigned at birth puberty later in life, it's gonna be okay. Just give them
Yeah, it's
what they
going to be
need.
fine. I mean, the biggest thing that normally gets affected is height. And guess what? Being tall isn't necessarily that great, and people are short without puberty blockers. Like, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Um uh yeah, I just yeah, you know, there's yeah, you know, would I yeah, I would love to not have to have to shave every day because I didn't have to go through male puberty. I would love to have a lower voice. I'm really lucky that I'm one of the like I had a very androgynous curvy body beforehand. Like my parents grew up like constantly like if somebody came up from or saw me from behind, they'd be like, "Oh, is that your daughter?" And my dad would be like, "That's my son," and I'd be like, about that. But you know,
Eight cracking
um,
sounds.
I mean,
Yes, protect
I
trans
was
youth,
a
totally.
very, I was very, I was a very strong-willed child. I'm the oldest. There's a thing about premature children. Apparently, premature kids are very determined and strong-willed, because you have to be determined and strong-willed to survive being born premature.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that was very true of me. And I remember being the first time I had a gender talk to me was when I was about 5 or 6. I think I was 5, and me going up to my mom and put one hand on my hips and being like, "Mom, I've got something to tell you." And she's like, "What's that?" I'm like, "Shh, I'm a girl." And my mom being like, "That's not how it works." And I'm like, and I still remember going, "I'm pretty sure it works. That's how it works. Like, I know I'm a girl, so I'm a girl. That's how it works, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And my mom had the gender talk, boys are this and girls are this. And I still remember thinking, going, that was a really interesting talk. Why? What was that talk for? Not connecting that my mom was trying to correct me. I was like, okay, that's cool. I'm still a girl. Like, I don't get, yeah. And I have lots of funny stories about like me being and identifying and thinking I was a girl as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like my mom's not very good. My mom is a very non-personal person. She doesn't like getting into personal topics. She doesn't like talking about biology and body and stuff like that. And so I remember, but my family were also very open. We didn't, there was trigger warning, some kind of like social abuse stuff going on in my household with my dad who had a lot of control issues. So we didn't have doors in any of my house.
Oh, yikes.
Only my parents had doors, and this includes the bathroom. So my poor mom just like was used to kids hanging over her while she was trying to go to the bathroom. And because of that, I had a very young experience with tampons and pads. And I remember asking my mom, "Oh, what's that?" Like, curious child, probably about it was after the first one. So it was somewhere between 6 and 7 or 8, going, "Oh, what's that? What's that for?" And my mom, in typical my mom fashion, was like, "Girls use them when they bleed. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's all." Like, cue about 5 years of me sticking maxi pads in my underwear every time I skinned a knee. I'm going, I don't get how this works, but okay, it must be some kind of like magic potion for girls that stops them from bleeding. I don't know. So,
Magic potion.
yeah, it was a time.
It
Excuse
was
me.
it was a whole myth.
Yeah.
Um. Okay. So the next question that's sort of adjacent. So if you feel like you've already answered it, we can move on. But the next one is, what coming out advice do you have for folks coming out today?
Um, go at your own pace. Come out when you need to come out. Um, you know, I will never, and I don't think anyone should judge if you never come out to a certain family member. That's fine. If you have old-fashioned great-grandmother who you talk to once every 3 years and you're fine with her using the wrong pronouns or whatever during that time period, that's fine, that's up to you. Um, it's also okay to cut people out if you don't wanna come out to them, in my opinion. Um, like, if you know someone's gonna take something badly, yeah. Also, biggest cheat, like, this is my cheat. If you have a large family, come out to the gossip first. She'll do all the rest of the work for you.
Pro
And by the
tips.
time you've met your aunts and uncles, they all know, and they've been discussing it for months, so you don't even have to come out to them. Always, come out I came out to my although I have known this to backfire because it'll be like, you'll come out to the I
That's
know at least
amazing.
2 people who came out to the gossip expecting them to then gossip, and it's the one time that they're like,
They
"Okay, this
didn't.
is a secret I can keep." And you're like, "No! I came out to you because you don't keep secrets." But yeah, I came out to my gossipy aunt first and let her do all the other work. There are some family members I have never officially ever come out to.
Yeah.
I assume the word got there eventually.
Yeah.
And that, just in general, and this kind of goes with coming out or just being trans or just being neurodivergent or whatever. You don't owe anyone any relationship. I don't care whether they spent 45 hours giving birth to you or they worked 50-hour days to feed you. You don't owe anyone a relationship. And if that person in the long run is going to be awful and crappy to you,
Mhm.
cut them. You can love somebody and respect them while disagreeing with them and not having them in your life.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, do it. Sometimes those people will come back to you and be like, I realized I was a jerk, and sometimes you'll never hear from them again. And in my opinion, that's a bonus.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Yeah, and come out to the people like there will be people that will understand. Come out to them first. That's usually easier. Also, I know this is well, I mean, I came out to the people that I thought were going to be hard to come out to by letter.
Yeah.
You could do it by email.
My
Just
wife did that
send
too.
them an email and just blah, 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 and then ignore the mail for the nice thing about it is if you do it by mail, it's a lot easier to ignore their response letter
You're not getting
or
left on red.
yeah. You could just be you're like, "Oh, so grandma replied. Just gonna leave that card over there till I'm feeling a little bit better."
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
I recommend
Uh,
bookending for difficult conversations of any variety, but especially this. Like, have your buds who understand what's going on, like support you and like have a check in before, have the conversation or read the letter, whatever, and have that person or a person available to check in after and plan that all ahead of time. Like,
yeah,
it's just basic emotional self care. Like, bookend. Have your
yeah.
community support you. Don't do it alone if you can help it.
And, I guess the other thing I would say from my own personal experience is, um, be prepared to be surprised. Um, and my own personal experience yet again with my mother, who, well, as I told you before, is an A+ communicator. Um, A+. I sent her a letter. 2 months later, no response. So, sent her another letter. 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, no response. So I sent her a third letter, which I finally got a call going, "I get it! Stop sending me the same letter over and over again." I'm like, "But you didn't say anything." Like, we talk on clarification, we would talk on the phone between letters occasionally, and she never said anything. So I was just like, "Oh." And she's like, "Well, what did you want me to say? It changed nothing. You're my eldest child. I love you." I was like, "Oh, well, okay. Here's an idea. You could have said that." Um, yeah, be prepared. And my mom grew up very Catholic. I thought for sure she was one of the ones that was going to have a harder time with it. You know, um, in that, I think the final thing is acceptance and understanding don't, like someone can accept you and not understand. And I think that it's really easy to be like, they don't understand me, thus they don't accept me.
Mhm.
Um, my mom accepts me completely, um, but she doesn't understand, and she never will.
Yeah.
No matter how many different ways I've tried to explain it to her, she'll never understand. And that's fine, because you know what? At the end of the day, it's my life and I'm the only one who has to understand it.
Yep.
Um, and sorry, and just one other thing is that don't let anyone else tell you what is or isn't okay for you to come out, or the way you interact with the people you come out with, or the way you interact with people that knew you before you transitioned. At the end of the day, those are your boundaries to make, and no one else has to understand them. And yet again, this is coming from a perspective with my mother. My mother still calls me by my birth name. I don't like.
You don't like dead
Uh,
name?
I don't use dead name in this
Mhm.
case. She does call me by my birth name, um, and that's because my mom fought really hard to both keep me as a child. She had me very young. I was conceived out of wedlock, and she fought really hard against her Catholic father to keep me,
Mhm.
both first as a pregnancy and then as a child. And she fought really hard with my dad, who has like worst taste in names ever, um, to get my name to be my name. If it was up to my dad, I would be Ebenezer Conrad, and no one deserves that name, in
No
my
one.
opinion.
Nope. Your dad should
uh,
just rename himself Ebenezer Conrad.
he didn't want to name any of my siblings that, but his firstborn, Ebenezer Conrad. I was like, "Where's that? What?
What
What?"
is his name? I think Brooklyn Michelle is
Um,
a delightful name.
yes. So for me, like I want to be clear. If we're out in public, if you were ever to meet me with my mom, it's Brooklyn and it's she and it's her.
Mhm.
But I also recognize in my case, I will always be my mom's baby boy that she fought to
Mhm.
have.
Mhm.
And I'm not willing to take that away from her. And it's not important to me to take it away from her. She respects me, she loves me, and that's what I need from her. Um, and I get a I when I've discussed this in the past, I've had people who have critiqued me over it, and I'm like, "You know what? It's my life. I'm the one who has to be happy with it, and so I don't care that you think it's rude that my mom calls me by my birth name or my dead name. Um, I don't I don't care." Um, yeah. That would be my other thing, and that just goes with everything in transition. So, like, another example is, so because I haven't had any lasers to remove my facial hair or anything like that, um, from a combination of being poor and ADHD, meaning I never make any appointments to see how much it'll cost. Uh, uh, so I got really into shaving. Like, I have a little fancy shaving brush, and I get a little fancy
Mhm.
shaving soap, and I have a nice fancy razor. I don't think that makes me any less of a woman or anything like that, and, if you
Mhm.
do, I don't care. Um, don't be afraid to enjoy the things that you have to do. Like, if you have to shave every day, then feel free to enjoy it and get the fancy stuff. It doesn't make you more masculine to do it the old-fashioned fancy way.
Mhm.
Um, you know? Uh, enj you know? Yeah, if you are assigned female at birth and you enjoy wearing fancy bras but identify as a trans guy, do it. Like, don't let anyone try to tell you that the things that you enjoy make you any less or not less trans, because I will dub thee trans. I dub all thee who think they are trans trans. You are trans. You are trans enough.
You
You are
don't have to
enough.
you don't have to have dysphoria to be trans. You don't have to be on
You know,
HRT to be trans. You don't have to have a
th-
new name to be trans. There's no
mm,
there's no prerequisite. If you're trans in your brain, you're trans. Done.
exactly. If if you think you're trans, then you're trans enough.
Yep.
Like, if you feel trans, you're trans enough. I just
Yes, 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 yes.
I think another one that you to pick on is dysphoria. I don't have any of the typical dysphoria. I'm happy being naked. I don't have any genital dysphoria. I don't have any of that. Um, my dysphoria, for the most part, it's in the things I can change. Like, I have huge dysphoria about the size of my hands. I have huge dysphoria sometimes about how big my feet look. And unfortunately, there are no surgeries for either of those things.
Nope.
Like, you know,
Yeah. My
I
wife
have
has the same
huge,
issue. Yeah.
like, I have way more bigger problems with the size of my, how wide my shoulders are most days than whether I have a penis or not.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if that's uh,
It's okay.
TM, um,
So instead of saying you're
uh,
pre-op, would you say you're non-op?
uh, yeah, mostly from laziness and indecision. Like, I've
Um,
never decided, like, I am not getting an operation. It's
sure.
more like I've never prioritized saving for it, and I can never quite decide whether I want to have it or not. And it's just that ADHD thing. Like, I get caught in the decision, like, what if I have the surgery and I don't like it? I can't go back.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm okay most days. Like, actually, I'm okay. Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't, it doesn't really bother me. I think yet again, living in America, being quite young, being quite poor, I also had a lot of like kind of real talk with myself of like, you know, using the numbers, these numbers are probably out of date, so please don't come at me. But like, I was looking at 100 grand US to have surgery.
Yeah. It's somewhere around
And
70 to 80K for bottom surgery now.
yeah, and I was just like, unless I start doing heavily illegal things, I'm not gonna get that kind of money. Like, I just not. I might have seen that much money in my lifetime. I probably have, but like, and so I just kind of was like, well, I guess I better start liking this. Like, because I'm just the kind of person that if this is what I'm stuck with, then that's fine. I'm not gonna hate it every day. Like,
Yeah.
because that's just a waste of energy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And it's the same reason I've never done any vocal therapy. Mostly because I was raised by feral lesbians, in San Francisco. Actually, they'd be offended that I called them lesbians, but they use the D word that some of the
Yep.
younger generation consider a slur. I don't, they don't. San Francisco riot girl lesbians very much don't like being called lesbians, and
Mm-hmm.
at least in my experience from when I was growing up. And so I went to like 2 vocal therapy classes, and I went, "This is a bunch of sexist bullshit, I'm out." That was my personal
What
opinion
year
of it.
was it?
2000,
Okay.
2002, and there was a lot of, "In order to be believed as a woman, you must make every sentence a question." And, I mean, this is still the days where there were some like, in the early 2000s, to give you an idea of how things moved on, there were trans women who lied about being attracted to women because there were some psychologists that would not give them hormones or let them transition if they thought they were
So
gonna be a lesbian.
they were commingling gender and sexuality, which are two
Um,
completely separate things.
it wasn't that they were commingling them. There was this belief that, um, yeah, that a real trans women, that real trans women were heterosexual and would be attracted to men after transition. And also, I had at least heard one therapist say, "I'm not going to make any more gay people. We fix gay people. We don't make them."
Fuck that.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the main reason I've never done any. I mean, I'm pretty lucky that I was a very camp person before. Like, I have people are like, "Oh, how have you changed the way you behave or act or talk since you transitioned?" And my answer is 0.
Yeah.
And this is how I've always been.
Do you think I have questions now about like possible like neurodiversity and like the effort it takes to mask or like choosing to mask, choosing to not mask and how that might have crossover with like trans stuff and trying to like mask and pass as cisgender versus just being really very, very trans and in everyone's face about being trans just by existing,
Yeah.
not even necessarily by like getting in someone's face, just, you know.
Yeah. I think that for me, there's a huge connection. I just like, I knew other young trans people who were transitioning at the same time as me who were trying to go stealth. And I just would look at them and go, it's been 10 minutes since we woke up and I'm already exhausted thinking about all
Yeah.
the things you have to do just to hide that you're trans.
Yeah.
I, I'm going to wear my shirt that says, I'm sorry, is my dick too long for this skirt, and just be me. So
That's amazing.
thanks.
I want that shirt.
It was my favorite shirt. It was my
It wouldn't make
favorite
no
shirt.
sense for me to wear it, but I still want it.
I had another one. I had another one that said, um, hey, handsome, what are you scared of? That mine's bigger than yours?
This is so good.
Oh, I have to say, like some of the trans shirts that we had in the early 2000s were pretty great.
If you
But yeah,
felt
I
like
think I
doing a
eventually,
fashion show and like taking selfies in these shirts, if you still have any of them, and
I
like
don't think
posting
I
them in
have any of them
selfies, I
anymore.
would love it so hard.
I've passed them on,
Good for
as
you.
I passed them on to other trans people who I was like, this is more you now. But yeah, and I think that was like a big part of a big part of it was growing up where like in transitioning where I transitioned in a place that was so accepting, and I had so many strong icons around me, and just like badass women. I was just very much, this is who I am. You don't like it, you know where the door is, you know? You know? Uh Yeah, and I would say things like, you can, if you don't like it, you can, I'd say you can suck my, but that would be a privilege you don't deserve.
That's
Like,
right. That's right.
um,
It's like saying fuck you is like, oh, but I wouldn't though.
yeah. Um, yeah, and I think that and I think that I am a big proponent of, um, if you take something on and you make it something you're proud of, or you make it something that is who you are, then it can't be used to hurt you. You know? I like, people would shout out the T word, which is a word I don't like. Both I don't like the TRANNY, and I don't like
Mm-hmm.
the SH word. Mostly because I don't like the exotification that those words come with. Um, and as somebody who was mentally screwed up massively by the fetishization that trans women go over, like I like took me like most of the 10 years of my transition to unravel the the effects of fetishization on me as a young person. Um uh I really dislike any of those kind of words, but people would shout them out at me at a car, and I'd be like, A plus, do you know your colors too? Like how many fingers am I holding up? Like, are
Mm-hmm.
we, is this some kind of
This is
test?
this is basic. This is basic knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. My favorite, so I went through a really kind of like androgynous phase, on trying to find where I felt with femininity and playing around with my gender when I was younger. Never not identifying as a woman, but playing around with the different ways that a woman can present in this world. And my favorite was when I used to have like, the very hip 2000s, like the wall, the really short back and sides, but then you spiked up just the front,
Mm-hmm.
like boy band hairstyle, and
Yeah.
wearing mini
Frosted
mini
tips.
skirts. Yeah, yeah. I didn't do the frosted tips because I do have some taste. Right? No offense to anyone who had frosted tips. Um, but doing various different things, and kind of playing around with the way I could present myself as a woman. And I remember one time when I was in that kind of like phase, and I had, those jeans that I had when I was younger, that they were more holes than jeans. They really were just seams with pockets. Um, and this guy was like, F slur. I mean, D slur. I mean, what? And then he walked away like he was such a, and it was one of my favorite moments. He was so confused. He's like, I don't know whether you're a gay man or a gay woman, or actually now I have so many questions. I'm just gonna walk away. I kind of regret engaging with you at all. And I was like, I didn't say a thing. This is great. This is a great comeback. You just did all the work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Love it. Oh, well, it is 5 here,
Yeah.
and while we could talk about these other 2 questions, is there anything else? I have like one more short thing to share at the very end, but is there anything else that you feel like you really want to make sure you say before we wrap up for the day?
Mm, um,
This is so much
just
fun.
go out. Just go out and be your weird self. Like, now at a place in my life where I walk around as a trans Victorian ghost. I wear almost exclusively Victorian style clothing. I wear a corset every day, and just live your weird truth. The more you own your weirdness and everything that makes you uniquely you, the more people will love you and find you, and just, just do it. Just be it. Yeah.
Love that. Well, a while ago, I don't know how many minutes because I have no concept of time. A while ago, we were discussing the importance of acknowledging your ancestors. And
Mm,
like, when you introduce yourself, you include that ancestor piece because it's part of where you've been. And I wanted to share this video with folks. So Trans Capybara, my wife and I, who Trans Capybara is a trans woman, share her pronouns. We got married back in October during pandemic, so there's very few of us there. But we managed to get a video recording of our wedding. It's I would say it's low production. It was all just shot on a cell phone. We didn't have fancy mics or multiple camera angles, but um, we there is a part of so our ritual is very like witchy pagan thing, which we've already talked about a bit in our stream today too. But there is a part of the ritual where we invite our trans ancestors to come and bear witness to our ritual. And I think it's important that people in the queer community broadly, who have been so harmed by spiritual practices and religion in general as practice because it's a form of oppression. I just think it's important for folks to know it's possible to have some sort of spirituality or meaning making device in your life. It's possible to have ritual and kind of make sense out of things. And I just offer our 33-minute entire wedding video. The whole thing was 33 minutes. Um, as a little morsel of like wholesome trans joy that you can tuck in your pocket and know that it is possible to have joy and like love in your life if you're a trans person. My wife came out when she was 40ish, to jump back to that age question, and like lost a marriage, lost a house, like lost 3/4 or
mm,
4/5 of her time with her kids, and had to go through puberty and all of the things. And at this point, the almost fairy tale ending that both of us are getting to live together today is like we're two some flavor of trans, right? I'm not binary, not trans binary, but two trans
mm,
people who have fallen in love and have a beautiful life together. And like, we're getting to do the things that we love, and it's really beautiful. And because we're so like solid in our connection, and I don't feel like I'm gonna lose my significant other because I'm trans and like a month on T and all of this other shit that
mm,
trans people have to go through. um like we have this opportunity to hold space for the trans community, for the non-binary community, for the questioning people, the little baby eggs who are like, I don't know what's
mm,
going on. And so, please, if you decide you want to, no pressure, but please enjoy our trans joy
mm.
and remember your ancestors.
I just want to add to that as also, I'm a very deeply spiritual person, and as I mentioned previously, I'm now divorced. I had a very successful marriage. It just wasn't a long-term one. And I was married as a trans woman to a trans guy openly, in a church by a minister.
That's amazing.
So it's like there's space in all faiths for trans people if you find if you're willing to look for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went to seminary as a lesbian. I wasn't trans yet, but I was I was. I didn't know I was trans. That's actually what I meant to say. And I went to the gayest seminary I could find in Berkeley, California. You've
Mm,
maybe even heard of it if you were in San Francisco for a while. And so I resolved the whole you can be gay and Christian thing. Like I was like, nope, that's fine
yeah.
now. And then I was like, but actually I'm witchy. And later I'm like, oh, but also I'm trans. And like, so
Mm,
the identity kept evolving past that, but there is resolution for that too, you know.
yeah.
And not every you're it's cool to be atheist too, totally fine. But just so you know,
Mm,
like spirituality is an option. Humans are meaning making creatures, and I'm not telling you which religion or spiritual practices to have. There's a lot of valuable ones. I have 2 degrees in religion. I studied a lot of them. It's like one of my special interests. I think any way
mm,
people make meaning out of life is fascinating to think about and talk about. And I could go on a tangent, but I won't. But um,
yeah.
yeah, there is hope to have a meaningful life as a trans person. It's not all doom and gloom forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Um, I don't know if you're a hugging type person, but if we were in person, I would offer you a hug right now because this was really heartwarming and wonderful. And if you're
Yeah.
like not down, I would like wave or like give a handshake or something that is at your level of comfort.
I'm a short hug person. I
The like,
I I I, I like hugs, but most hugs they go about 3 seconds too long, and I kind of get this like because I have suspicions that I'm slightly on the the uh autistic spectrum. I
mm-hmm.
have these moments where I'm like, okay, why are we still touching?
Yep, yep,
This is great.
yep,
So short hugs are good. The
yes.
California hug is very good for me. Like the kind of like tap tap. That's
The
good.
lean
That's
in, pat,
about
pat. Yeah.
yeah.
See, consent, negotiating. I love it. Well, this is really wonderful. Do you want to go live so we can raid you and come follow you
Yes.
and meet your community with your go live notification and raise the roof?
Yeah. Yeah. Give me a moment and I can do that.
Wonderful. What a good time.
I-
If my body had more spoons, I could just talk forever. This has been such a great conversation.
Hey, I've had a lot of fine time too. Lot I word good.
Yay, words. Well, we have loved having you, and I'm going to go to the ending soon screen so we don't get raided right before we raid. But take your time setting up and just let me know when you're ready. We'll just hang out and listen to music and or I'll talk while we wait. Yay. Okay. So, thank you everyone. This has been a lovely conversation today. Please remember there's a lot of resources out there for you. If you want to learn more about Indigenous stuff, it's out there. If you want to learn more about your own gender, it's out there. Whenever I find resources, which I've been realizing lately, I do a lot more than your average bear. Um, I post them in Discord. There's a specific channel called Solidarity Resources. That's sort of a feed of all of the different types of diversity, including racism, including gender, including neurodiversity, and more. And that's sort of the feed where I post the best of the things that I find all over the place doing the looking about. So, you can think of it as your own personalized, Meowster researched, like thread that you opt into to learn cool stuff all the time. So, anyways, I'm gonna put on some tunes and we will listen to music until we're ready to go raid Brooklyn. And I will put the raid messages here in the chat. My next scheduled stream, I believe, is tomorrow. I am double checking. Tomorrow we have 1d20 games, so we're gonna pick from the list of games on my channel here and hang out and be trans but also enjoy a hobby, playing video games. So would love to see you all swing by tomorrow or whenever. And yeah, I'm really grateful for all of you showing up. Thank you to Brooklyn's community for coming and checking us out, for the follows. Thank you everyone for all the bits and cheers. I really super deeply appreciate your generosity, your attention, your engagement with this topic, and let's keep being awesome. One day, this recording will be a podcast, and you can go follow that stuff in the doobly-doo. Again, it's all in the link tree. Dungeon_Meowster. But I also did the direct podcast link here in the chat for those who are here with us live. Yeah, I'm doing lots of things. If you like what's happening and you want to help somehow, like if you want to be on my team of helpers, let me know. Send me a direct message on Discord. I am doing more things than I can reasonably do forever, and I think they're all good. So I would love to continue growing my team of helpers to get more non-binary content pushed out into the world for people to enjoy. Thank you all so much.